So this item, you have three separate decisions regarding funding contributions to the Auckland War Memorial Museum, the Museum of Transport and Technology, MOTAT, and the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Act, the entities that come under that. Each of these levies is governed by their own piece of legislation, which have slight differences, but fundamentally allow the entities to levy the council for a funding contribution each year. At the outset, we can confirm that the council's serious financial situation and expectations of fiscal responsibility were conveyed to the entities early and often throughout the process. This was done through a letter of expectation, through letters, through meetings, both formal and informal. As it relates to the Auckland War Memorial Museum, Council engaged directly with the War Memorial Museum Trust Board and staff for this process. The Deputy Mayor led this process, and that included numerous meetings dating back before the elections to test and scrutinise the museum's plans and financial assumptions, and to offer revenue suggestions, revenue questions, and to offer ways to help find savings through shared services to try and reduce the impact on the council through the levy. These meetings resulted in the museum moderating their initial request, which was an 8.8% increase, down to a 4.8% increase. The decision you have in front of you today is a recommendation that you improve a 3% increase, which is less than obviously what the museum had initially asked for. The reason, quite simply, is the 3% is what council budgeted for, and it also represents a compromise between a zero and offering something, acknowledging that over the last 3 years they've taken a 0% increase. The 3% and the way we've approached it is, when it comes to it, 3%, as that's what we budgeted, would help to reduce council's budgeting shortfall by close to $2 million, and that's the way we proceeded when we engaged with the museum. As it relates to ARAFA and the entities, the process is slightly different, and that under the legislation, a board is set up to assess the funding requests of the 8 amenities. The board have acknowledged council's financial position in their request, and they've put forward a levy that does include a $400,000 increase over last year, which is a 2.5% increase. This is made up of the final part of a shift to a salary model for the Auckland Philharmonic Orchestra, which was agreed between the council some time ago, and an increase to the Auckland Theatre Company, which is needed to address previous underfunding. However, the board do say that they're conducting a review into the Auckland Theatre Company's funding to explore this and to address how they will fund them going forward. As it relates to MOTAT, I will pass to Sarah.
Kia ora koutou, good afternoon. I just want to acknowledge also we've got representatives from the MOTAT board here, their Chief Executive, GM Business Planning, and also the Chair. So look, in regards to MOTAT, the interface is actually managed primarily by Tātaki Auckland Unlimited, who, under an advisory and management agreement with Council, provide advice to us on the recommended levy for MOTAT. And that's documented in a letter that I believe has been circulated with the agenda. Their recommendation is that Council accept the proposed levy from MOTAT, and that levy is effectively a 0% increase, a reduction of around $80,000 from last year. They've been very cognisant of Council's financial pressures, and similar to other processes with the museum, we've met regularly with officers from MOTAT on the different their budget scenarios, pressures, understanding their capital programs, etc. And that has resulted in the 0% increase which is before you today. They've approached the process collaboratively and pragmatically, and as indicated, with a strong sense of the fiscal pressure that Council is facing. So I'll hand back to Chris for a concluding comment.
Thanks, Sarah. Just in conclusion, I would say, look, our advice and recommendations is based on our assessment of the levies against the criteria set out in legislation. You'll all be aware that the Council is significantly limited by these pieces of legislation, and one such restriction is that if these levies not agreed today, the next step under the Acts is arbitration. And I note that the Mayor is leading work to seek legislative change on these restrictions to try and provide the council with a bit more control over how we choose to fund these museums going forward. But with that, we are happy to take questions.
I think I'll divide this into 3 lots, really. So we'll take questions and discussion. We'll deal with the museum first, then we'll deal with the a RAFA, then we'll deal with MOTAT. Is that right? So questions first about the museum, and I've got you down as the first question, so you're going to get a go at each one, but we'll go around rather than the whole lot at once. We'll chop up. But in the background of this, we have witnessed a whole lot of people in here with no cuts signs this morning, and people are worried we are offering pretty severe cuts to whole sections of our community. And here we are being asked to shell out a whole lot of increases at a time when we're cutting other sectors. And I know that everyone feels grumpy about these things, but I feel most uncomfortable about granting more money to some sectors when we're cutting others, particularly before we've got the budget. It may well be that if we do the right things in the budget, we can offer some additional funds towards ameliorating cuts here and there, but it doesn't look consistent to me to be offering increases across the sector at a time when we're asking other people to do less. And I'm certainly not persuaded by agreements about shifting to salaries and bits and pieces in the past. But I've heard the War Memorial, and I'm going to take questions on that now, but I have spoken to the War Memorial, and I know it's a wonderful group, and I stood in the cold with the chief executive the other day, but I remain unconvinced that there's not space in there for them to shift their offices in there. I remain completely unconvinced that you can't charge $5 a head to everybody going in there with kids free. I've told that they'd reduce that income, the number of visitors by 20,000. So in other words, in order to save 20,000 people, we're going to cough up another 3%. That doesn't make sense. And so I certainly am not at all keen on any increase to the War Memorial Museum, and it doesn't mean to say I don't like it. It just means that I don't feel comfortable about asking everyone else to have a haircut and treating them any differently. So that's my bit. Councillor Darby, followed by Councillor Walker.
Thanks, Mayor. Chris, am I right in saying that the Auckland Museum has actually not had an increase? Is it coming up 3 years now? It was 0%, and then we actually approached them and they were good enough to say, look, we'll wear another 0%. That was the last budget. And so now you're recommending 3%. So where does that, can't do the maths on my head right now, but where does that leave the actual increase on 3 years in a percentage term?
There's a reason I went to law school and I can't do maths in my head that quickly.
Okay, sorry I put you on the spot there, Chris.
I think the short answer is that relative to inflation, they've probably gone backwards, but in real terms, they've been held at a 0% increase for 3 financial years now, with a 3% increase this year.
Whereas a lot of other cultural institutions were not, or were they also held at the same 0% for 2 terms?
MOTAT, and I'm conscious they're sitting behind me and I'd hate to get these figures wrong, but I think in the emergency budget, MOTAT actually took a decrease in the funding that they received, and then I think a modest increase, and I think what's proposed this financial year is slightly less than last financial year, Sarah?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, they took a decrease in the emergency budget to assist with council's financial position, and then in the subsequent year did get an increase, but was still on par for what they would have received had they not taken that cut. And then this year they're proposing a 0% increase, which is about $80,000 less than previous years.
So Chris, you've been in close discussions with the museum for quite a few months, I understand. On the revenue side, as the Mayor's correctly highlighted, that's a conversation that needs to be had. Can you just take us through what revenue opportunities you have discussed with the museum and what the response has been and what changes they are introducing on the revenue side?
Yeah, so there was pretty much a few meetings were literally a blue sky of asking them to consider many different options, including banner ads on the website, charging the Mayor's suggestion to charge people who are not from Auckland. There was the suggestion of closing for a day, which is actually would end up costing them money, closing one day. The response is that they have looked into a lot of the stuff we asked was not stuff they hadn't already thought about, and the focus is on largely recovering from that COVID impact and then building revenue in that way, and also through that philanthropic donations. So they're looking at it, they are working on it, they have all this in their mind, they are taking on board our suggestions. The other way of, it's not revenue, but savings through shared services that we've looked at is through insurance, electricity, joining the council and those sort of things. Those are stuff that is ongoing, not simple, but stuff that we would hope would contribute to make up for the shortfall.
So just in terms of the collection, they're responsible for a collection which I'm sure is worth some many tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Can you just tell me, at that funding level that you're recommending, which is a 3% increase, which is still probably behind on 3 years ago, are you confident that the collection, the integrity of the collection is being cared for? That we are not at risk of a deterioration of a collection that Aucklanders expect us to be safeguarding?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the way we looked to take care of that was through reviewing the asset management plan and to seek assurances from the museum that it's robust and it has been reviewed by an independent expert. So we have that. We've also, the Mayor's recent letter to them as it relates to the building, asked that the building was not something that, the maintenance of the building was not something that suffered as a result of having to make cuts. This is the funding for this year. Ideally, I think we would like to move towards a long-term funding plan, which is something that isn't in the works. But for this year, the assurances we received from the museum is that they can accept a 3% increase.
And lastly, Mayor, just in terms of the timing of the decision, the Mayor says, well, there's other institutions that will be making some decisions on later, and this one's now. Can you just highlight, why the timing now, and if there was a delay, what are those implications?
So quite simply, under the legislation, the levy has to be set by the end of the month, either through agreement or by arbitration. That's a deadline. The timing again, and the fact that it doesn't align with our budget processes is an issue with the legislation. It's something we would seek to fix. It is an issue.
Question about the Mayor about the museum from Councillor Walker, please.
Sure. So I just want to pick up on the question that Councillor Darby asked about the effective cuts that have been made to the museum. So my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we've had 0 increases. Effectively, that means that they haven't even met inflation, correct? Correct. That is correct. And would I be correct in saying that compared with the expenditure of Auckland Council over the period 2019 through to our projected 2023 year, that amounts to a 26.4% increase in expenditure over that period. This is the council group. If we take inflation away, let's say that's roughly 13.4%, that leaves a 13% increase above inflation for that period. That is for the council group. So I'm quoting some figures here that I know to be the case. So my question is, how is it that we're able to make these, frankly, severe cuts to the museum against a background where we're not applying the same rigour in terms of financial prudence ourselves? Is there some difference in the museum compared to the balance of assets and the like that we have?
I might jump into this one. I fear I'm straying into territory that's more with our Chief Financial Officer and our operational areas, but I think fundamentally, yes, we do have completely different businesses, and catering for growth is one of the key areas that we as a council group have to invest in, which drives a lot of our increases. Within our organisation, every year built into our budgets to make the budgets work, we have savings targets that we have to achieve. Jim and Peter gave you updates this morning on how we're progressing against this year's $90 million saving targets, and that's before we even start comprehending next year's 295 million that we have to find. One of your colleagues with some rose-tinted glasses did manage to find some positive financial news, but it was a small kernel amongst a sea of badness that we're facing. Fundamentally different businesses, and when we talk about severe cuts, I think just to put this in context, the museum's funding has been held as it has for 3 financial years. So yes, they've suffered in relation to inflation. I don't know if I'd describe that as a severe cut without minimising the efforts I've had to make to achieve those savings. And again, putting this in context, it's still a $33.8 million investment in the museum, so it's not an insignificant contribution. So I think fundamentally different businesses, we as a group are constantly looking for savings and efficiencies. The other organisations that we fund through here, MOTAT, also had to make cuts at some stage to accommodate our financial position, as have a number of the amenities that are funded through these regimes as well. I guess the point to make is that eventually all these things catch up, as they do with all of us, that if we hold funding at a certain level, renewals and maintenance and the like don't go away. In fact,
Sure.
Those issues catch up with us, and I think as Chris said before, I would emphasise this is an annual process. So if there is dire need as a result, we get to do this again next year and address these issues.
Okay. Has the museum explained to you that this is a critical year, given that they've had these cuts for successive years now? They've got a heritage building that's got significant maintenance. They've got exhibits that need to be refreshed that aren't being refreshed. Has that been explained?
I always feel slightly awkward having these conversations when they're sitting right behind us. But yes, we've had those conversations. Deputy Mayor Simpson has been in those conversations, and we understand the position that they're in, which is not dissimilar to the position that we and other parts of the council group are in.
And the last question I've got, just in terms of the performance of the museum and its delivery, do we have any measurement around the social value that the museum contributes, the cultural value, the value of the collections, and particularly the taonga, which are the best in the Southern Hemisphere, the best in the world. The tourism value of the museum and the importance of sustaining that. Have we taken these measurements, these metrics into consideration in some way?
We've certainly taken the benefits of those things you've described into consideration. The museum makes a good point of mentioning those things in the annual plan. As far as a specific metric, no, we haven't quantified those.
And do we make any comparison between the investment that we might put into the museum and, let's say, the investment into events, into tourism, into other things? Do we measure these things up so that we've got an idea as to the case for some investment in the museum this year to catch up? Do we make any comparison? Do we have any investment strategy around that or not?
The short answer is no, and it's the unenviable task that you'll face every annual plan and every LTP, where you have to make investment decisions between different classes of assets and activities which often don't bear comparison. $1 million worth of investment in a road produces a completely different outcome to $1 million worth of investment in a library versus a museum, and those are judgment calls that you have to make in every annual plan and LTP process.
Reserve the right to speak, thanks.
Okay. It is a different business. Of course, they were in COVID, they just shut. We still provided roads and buses and water and sewerage. And they should have saved some more money there in my view, but still, that's just my view. Councillor Fooley.
Thank you, Worship, and always nice the way that you say my name. Kia ora, team. Thank you to the other councillors who've already asked many of the questions and raised the concerns that I certainly had, especially around the value that we may or may not have measured of the museum itself in terms of the culture, the taonga that's there, and the benefit that it adds to our city and to our residents. Just a question then, in the Act under Section 23, and you did mention it, either on or before the 30th of April, we have to agree a levy, and if we don't agree, then it goes to arbitration. Is that correct? Okay. So in terms of the risks then, have you measured or quantified, and I'm sure that you've thought about it, but have you measured or quantified the risks if we do get to that stage? I'm not saying we will, and I hope we don't, but what happens if we don't reach an agreement and then it does have to go to arbitration? What is the risk to us as a council in terms of our reputation? What is the risk in terms of, or the cost, in terms of legal fees and things like that, if it does go down that road? And then I've just got another question after that, Your Worship.
Yeah, the risk of arbitration, I think, the discussions that we've had and the way to mitigate that risk are the discussion and the relationship that we've built with the museum and led by the Deputy Mayor. We have an understanding and we talk to each other often. And this recommendation was not made lightly. It's with a recommendation with the comfort that it is a compromise. I don't think anyone's really happy. There are arguments for a zero reduction and then arguments for an 8.8% increase. We've landed here, but it's at an amount that we can, I think everyone can live with for this year and avoid the risk of arbitration.
I'll just add to that two things. One thing a wise judge once said to me, a compromise is where everybody walks away upset, and I think we're in about that space. The second thing is, and I don't want to put words in the museum's mouth, but I'm pretty sure their director, David Gamester, in public input said that they could live with a 3% increase. David, feel free to correct me if I'm... He's nodding reluctantly behind me, so...
Okay, so thank you, and that does give me some comfort that you have, you've gone to some lengths to actually land in this place, because I do note it's a shortfall of about 580,000, which in the scheme of things is not huge, especially given some decisions we've made recently, even despite our financial position. Yeah, so I'm happy with that. I'm just mindful too that, you know, the museum can't, but it's also part of the legislation that they have to provide free public access. So their revenue streams are limited as well. So if we do go with the 3% and then say next year, because I did have a look at the building and I do thank the museum for that day that Councillor Walker and I went and had a look. It's a beautiful building that's withstood, you know, the test of time, but it is crumbling in places. It's over 100 years, so it's to be expected. If next year or the year after, they really, really need more help, you're saying that we can still consider that in the very near future if that's required.
We come back to you with monotonous regularity on these. You'll see us same time, same place next year. And just a point of clarification, I think the legislation says that it has to be free access to the war memorial aspect of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Kia ora.
Yeah, they can charge.
Yeah.
Okay. The number of free people is dropping every year. Deputy Mayor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of questions. Can you please confirm that the contribution we would approve under B means that we don't compromise our already $295 million hole, but if we changed it, it would?
That is correct based on my understanding. That was what was originally budgeted for, a 3% increase.
And thank you. And can you please confirm, because you've been in all the discussions that I've been in, but for the benefit of the others, and so it doesn't just is my personal view, that the relationship we hold with the museum is still fine? I mean,
I would.
What I'm trying to say here is that we've had a wonderful discussion, that it has, is it true that in the many discussions we've had, it's always been pleasant and we've always understood each other's perspective and we have settled on a compromise that is agreed by both sides?
I think that's an accurate description, yes.
Thank you.
We had a full and frank description and went out war. No. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And just in respect of that comment on, we'll be back here, same time, same place, same challenge. I mean, this has been going on for a number of years now, and I just wanted to pick up on a comment that was made by David during the presentation from the museum in respect of approaches to government, and it just seems almost farcical that, given the preeminence of the museum and how it speaks to all of Auckland and has such significance for not just the Auckland region but for New Zealand, he made some reference to approaches to government. Could you tell me what, if any, approaches, communications we've been involved with in terms of the position of the Auckland Museum with the government? Because that seems to be another example of where we've talked about it, but what have we actually done about it?
So the museum, in conjunction with other major museums in New Zealand, have joined together, and they have a process, and they are leading that, and we have numerous times offered to support them at the right time that is needed. Okay, so what form would that support take, and how timely is the implementation of that grouping and their requests that are being made? What sort of timescale are we dealing with there? That's something we were hoping to pick up after this process was completed, but in whatever way we can help them, we support trying to get more support from central government for those things that arguably should be funded by central government. So I can't tell you timing, but it is something we will pick up. So I'd suggest, Mr. Mayor, that's maybe one of your projects in light of your determination to take these important matters to the government and try and redress some of this kind of structural imbalance that Auckland Council has been trying to deal with for some time.
I believe that's item 385 on the list of things that we want them to clarify and fix. But we do have 40 MPs, and I am seeing them over the next couple of days. So.
I'd bring
But I will
it
add it
up.
up,
I'd
but-
bring it up to number 1 or 2.
Okay, it'll be in amongst it, I'm quite assured. I was joking ever so slightly about the number. I'm sorry I made a joke. I realise people don't get them anymore. Councillor Dalton, I'll try not to be funny.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you, Your Worship, got a reply to your letter asking about the condition of the building.
I don't think so, but I know the condition of the building is a capital issue and needs to be dealt with in the capital thing. I haven't got a particularly satisfactory answer to why they're not charging $5 a head for adults and free for kids, which would give them $5 million and wouldn't worry anybody. But there we go. Perhaps they're there at the back. The gentleman might like to explain why not, but there is no legislation requiring it to be free. And that's a cup of coffee. And would solve all these wretched problems, because later on we're going to be discussing about other groups who could charge a bit more too. People pay to go to the MOTAT quite a lot. So I didn't really answer your question. Well, they did tell me.
No, I didn't ask about costs of getting
Well,
in.
it was in the letter.
Sorry. I thought it was
Yeah.
just about the condition of the building.
The letter. Well, we're talking about that's the capital. The capital doesn't come out of this, I don't think.
Okay, it's just the OPEX.
Righto.
But, okay.
Councillor Lee, and we'll try and be serious now. Come on, Councillor Lee, be serious.
I just want to make a comment if I could, Mr. Mayor, but I'll wait till you think it's appropriate. The questions are over.
I too wish to make a comment. Would that be appropriate time?
Perhaps we can move. Are you happy to move to questions now? We assume that someone's going to move this later on. Comments, rather.
Is there a mover?
Okay.
Is there a mover and a seconder for A?
I'll second, Your Worship. I'll second.
Now, comments about A?
Oh, clarification? Can I have just a clarification? The Deputy Mayor's moving, but do we actually need the A?
Yes,
It feels like a kick in the shins. If you're going to move the B, we can take out the A?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that possibly that's right. I don't know quite who came up with this. And B doesn't actually say it's about the museum anyhow. I think what we really need to say, we are offering an Auckland Council funding contribution to the museum of 33.26 million. I think that's what we're trying to do, is that not?
Thanks, Chris. I think that's a very good suggestion.
The movers and seconders happy with that? There we are, okay. Well, now questions. Comment. Shit, it's tricky here. You can make a comment. I can't tell the difference sometimes.
I'm happy to make a comment, Mr. Mayor.
Questionable comment or commentable question.
You raised a question, interesting question earlier, that if other sections of the community funding lines are being cut back, why not the museum? Well, the answer to that one is the museum has been cut back for several years, and despite its ability to generate its own funds, which it has done very successfully over recent years, COVID caused the museum major problems in terms of generating funding. So I think the 3% is a very fair compromise, and I commend the principals of the museum, of the board, the Auckland War Memorial Museum Trust Board, for reaching that compromise with the council. In terms of why the museum is special, I will use a word that's not used in the council very much, and that's the word sacred. The museum itself is not only the locale of the cenotaph and the court of honour that that we saw thousands of people attend on Anzac Day, but it's actually a war memorial in its own right. It's 94 years old and probably the finest building in the country, and it needs to be maintained. But given its status as a war memorial and given the emotions that have been projected onto it by generations of Aucklanders, it surely can be described as a sacred site. Not only are the collections both national and international invaluable, but some of the items held there, including Maori items especially, are deeply tapu. So that's another aspect of sacredness, and that is why it is special. And I think that we need to show our responsibility towards the museum because of the special status that it merits. And so 3%, as I said at the outset, is very reasonable in the circumstances, and I support the motion by Councillor Simpson. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Simpson, please.
Look, I just want to reflect on the conversations we've had, and my comments are actually to the two gentlemen at the back of the room. I just want to say thank you. This is tough for both of us, and I want to thank you because we've had discussions over a number of months, haven't we? Maybe almost 10 months. I want to thank you very much. There's nobody in this room that doesn't value what you do for Auckland and what the museum represents to this region. So thank you, and thank you for the compromise. We value you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Walker.
So I want to speak in total support of the museum. The officers are right around the fact that the council has to provide for growth. But equally, that museum grows in stature, grows in respect of its collection every year. And often that is not appreciated. It is the repository for Aucklanders over many, many generations across all cultures, particularly the Māori culture. And as Mike pointed out, it is sacred, and the museum itself is an icon. In fact, it is one of the icons of Auckland, located as it is on one of our volcanic structures. It hurts me that the museum has had to suffer cuts against a background where it has put in measures that go to sustainability and reducing emissions. It's done great work in that respect. It's rebuilding from COVID and, frankly, needs help. Its exhibits, if you have a look at them, need to be refreshed. They need to be modernised, and these days that involves technology and giving stuff a lift so that young people, and young people in particular, can appreciate it. And we have growing numbers of young people in Auckland, many of whom visit that museum through school trips, through visits with their mums and dads and grandparents, and those numbers are growing. I repeat, growing. So we should be replenishing the museum and supporting it, particularly against a background where they have made cuts substantially more than the balance of the whole group. And it is most inequitable that we take the knife out and take it to icons and institutions that rely on many volunteers and deliver and consistently deliver in their performance. So, yes, I'll vote for this, but I would far prefer to vote for more. And I find it particularly disturbing that this vote is out of kilter with our larger vote around the budget. And I put to you, councillors, as much and all as we might consider this now, there may be the prospect of adding a top-up a little later, because the quantum that we're talking, that member Councillor Foley mentioned, amounts to a fraction of a rate increase, not much at all. But to that museum, to that sacred icon, it amounts to a lot. And if there is something that we as city fathers should be dedicating ourselves to on an ongoing basis, it is institutions like that, because that is why we are here.
Thank you for that. Councillor Newman. Oh, that's withdrawn. It's conscious. Councillor Foley, please.
Kia ora. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor Walker, for your impassioned speech as well. Like Councillor Walker, I would have supported much more, and I would have supported backing the museum for the full amount that they were asking for. But I accept that a compromise has been reached. I accept that the Deputy Mayor and our staff have done lots of work alongside the museum and have landed at this compromise. And I also accept that if in future they do come back to us, that, you know, the mood around the room sounds as if we will be supportive, and I hope that people remember that in a year's time, if that should happen. I just wanted to add my voice as well to commend the museum. It's a place, you know, that is sacred, as we've heard from Councillor Lee, and for my communities, it's a place that they have always enjoyed access to, free access to. And that's something that people in Otara, in Papatoetoe, in Mangere, in Otahuhu, and further south don't enjoy in many places of such significance in our city. There are very few places where the kids in my area can go for free and see the wonders of our city, the wonders of our histories, of our neighbours in the Pacific, standing alongside and celebrated and beautifully shown and preserved alongside the pharaohs of Egypt, down the road or down the hall from the great dinosaurs of the past. And it's wonderful for our kids in Otara to be able to go for free every year. That's one of the guaranteed trips that the kids at Dawson Primary in Otara have every single year. They're able to go to the museum. When their kids don't have much money, when their mums and dads don't have much money, during the school holidays, they know that they can go to the museum with their 4 or 5 kids, and they can let their kids run free. They can see their histories and their stories sitting alongside the histories and stories of the rest of the world. And they feel treasured, and they feel valued, and they feel included. And I'm sorry if I get emotional, but I know when I was a postgraduate student doing my master's and I had a baby, living across the road at the postgraduate flats in the Royal, the university flats, across from the museum, I would do that often. When my student allowance wasn't quite enough to get my son to any of those special places that you can visit in Auckland, we knew we could go across the road to the museum and spend an entire day, and he'd be marvelling at all the things that he'd be able to see, including the histories of our Pacific peoples. And so I thank the museum for all of their work over the generations. I'm grateful to be at this table and to be able to help in protecting all of the taonga there at the museum. And I wish that we would be able to give more, but I'm happy to support and to second the motion to give at least this 3% in order to ensure that this taonga continues to thrive and that we continue to have free access for all of our families and all of our tamariki across this beautiful city of ours, Tāmaki Makaurau. Kia ora.
Thank you for that. Councillor Newman, please. Are you there? Yeah. Councillor Fletcher.
The main contribution that I wanted to make has been made already with much eloquence by Councillor Foley and Councillor Lee. But I can confirm that at the dawn service on Anzac Day this week, that David Garnster, who's here at the moment, confirmed to me that he was comfortable with where the point of consensus that has been reached over the funding. This is just such a sacred place for all of us. It's a privilege, as Councillor Foley has said, to have this debate. I've been involved with advocacy in and around the museum for a long period of time, and it is an area that there's been a huge amount of support come from the community. When you look at the development that's taken place at the museum, it's people like Lindy Sainsbury, you know, that they funded the Sainsbury Horrocks Gallery in the museum. She headed up the Museum Circle Foundation, and until recently was working until the point that there was an election out of the centennial commemorations where there was an agreement that we needed to do something to honour the plans that were always there for the Court of Honour. She was leading the body of work that was going to go out into a major fundraising program with the public of Auckland. And it's a piece of work that I would like to see reactivated. We can't always fund things through the ratepayer, but we can use the role that we have as councillors and as mayor to actually see some of the completion of perhaps what was always anticipated. I've already spoken to the museum already today, but not only is it the Auckland War Memorial Museum, but it's also the home of so much of the Pacifica history. And often, the question that I would have liked to have asked this morning, but you cut it off after 2, is do we make to the government anything of the fact that, you know, the point of difference for Auckland is our Pacific Island community? Do we make, you know, of the 4.5 million artefacts that the Auckland War Memorial Museum has, much of it is really telling the stories of Pacific people. It's unique in the world. And I think that we do have incredible stewardship that we have to exercise on that. I believe it's responsible today that we are continuing the funding. I think there's so much more that we can be doing in taking leadership roles with the public to actually do the fundraising that is required. And I would like to feel that we can have a fresh debate on this as we go forward into the long-term funding plan. But if the officers, I know that we have a director who's here today who was unaware of the fact that there was a proposal by the Auckland Council to actually assist with the funding of the Court of Honour. There's a lot of work to be done, but for now, I think it's a good outcome. But I really do encourage you to understand the importance of this in terms of Pacifica. We talk about our treaty obligations and we talk about the importance within mana whenua, but we mustn't ignore the role and the very special place. So many people come from all around the world to see our Pacific collections, and that, you know, that is based at the Auckland War Memorial Museum. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Fletcher, and I make sure that those points are made to the Deputy Prime Minister, who is, of course, of Pacifica extraction and who is the person with who we are discussing transferring some of their costs back to them. And it's associated partially with the fact that government have moved in a very strong way to digitise their connections to New Zealanders, which is what's driving the public towards our things, because we have physical interactions. So you're right. Thank you very much for that point. Councillor Leone, and then perhaps Councillor, the Deputy Mayor might like to sum up.
Kia ora. Look, I just want to reiterate what a lot of other people have said. Being mana whenua myself and knowing that they hold so many of our very precious parts of our history, and the story there is just so important that we continue to work with them and prioritise the funding. But I also just want to touch on the fact, with the fact that I am a young mother with twins, and I do believe even, you know, mothers like myself that are in a situation we do have, you know, we're paid relatively well in terms of our roles at the moment, but we still continue to struggle in terms of paying for all the other things that we need to pay for. So maintaining options around the city where we can actually take our children. I take my kids to the Auckland Museum at least every school holidays. You know, it's one of the outings that we do. And part of that will be around the fact that it is, you know, it is free for families. But I just, you know, I think that it's just good that we continue to work with them. I'm really happy with the compromise, but we have to continue working at that going forward. And it's good to hear that we'll be talking to the ministers about that too. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to sum up, Deputy Mayor?
No, Your Worship, I think we're all in agreement, and I want to just add one thing. Thank the staff. You've been fantastic. It's been a long journey, and again, thank you to the museum.
We're arriving at the compromise, which is what's up on the board there, so with your permission I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary? Carried. Thank you very much. We will move to... what's next? A RAFA, which does sound quite a cool name, a RAFA, doesn't it? It sounds like some sort of music, but it's not. I will refer you to pages 279 in the large tome of open attachments, which has a little bit more detail on this. And perhaps you might like to go through, because we have largely, if I understand this, to get to this figure, it's a mixture of people being left alone, some people reducing their demands, others adding on sums, and even the board wanting more money, which seems a bit greedy. So you're going to move what, that we do this? Thank you. Who's speaking to this, and can you speak to this and address those items which are on page 279?
Through the chair, I guess a point to note on the individual allocations to each of the amenities. The role of the funding board that's appointed under the legislation is to assess the funding applications made by each of those entities, and it's quite a long and involved process. I think it starts about some 10 months before the financial year for which the funding is actually required, and there's a lot of information provided by those organisations to the funding board, which is interrogated and follow-up questions and information provided. And what you have there is the funding board's assessment of the level of funding required to keep each of those organisations sustainable. Put it another way, those entities are under a legal obligation to find other sources of revenue before coming to the funding board for a contribution from the ratepayer. So,
just a moment, if they started some months ago, then was the funding board aware that this organisation was in the can for $295 million? Because if they're not, then those assessments are without basis.
They are, and they have been made aware. It's a lot like our annual plan process, that new information comes into it throughout the process and informs it as it goes along. The draft annual plan that the funding board is required to put out for public consultation, I think that was done in sort of December or January-ish, but since then they've had to consider the feedback, public feedback that they received before making their final recommendation to council, which I think was in February of this year. So by that stage, council's financial position was well and truly known to them. So that is the assessment of from the funding board about how much funding each of those organisations needs to remain sustainable and viable. It's not a staff assessment of it, so we can't comment on it in any great detail other than to say it's been a rigorous process. And there's perhaps two organisations that have been highlighted by the funding board there. One is the Philharmonia Orchestra, which is it's the final step in implementing a salary model for its players that was discussed and agreed previously by council. That's been happening since about 2019 from memory. And the Auckland Theatre Company, which over the last couple of financial years, I think it's become apparent, hasn't been sustainable on the level of funding that it's been received. I think a point to note that the theatre company in particular has been hit particularly hard by COVID and the number of performances that it was able to actually put on where the theatre was able to be open. Plus, since they've sort of taken over with the construction of the Waterfront Theatre and their lease of that facility, I suspect there's been some costs associated with that. But we can't go into that in too much detail because that is the funding board's job. All we can say is that from our observations, the recommendations are largely in line with the funding principles set out within the Act.
If we accept the 17.34 million recommendation, which is coming from the ARAFA board and includes a number of increases, what does that do to our $295 million? Does that increase it or decrease it or leave it at $295 million still to be found?
It leaves it as it is. If all of these levies are accepted today as they are, the 295 problem stays at $295 million problem.
We're better like 2 million.
Oh, we're better.
Close to 2 million.
Yeah.
Councillor Baker has a question.
So just, I mean, Alistair and I appreciate and get totally the fact that this is the sole domain of the RAFA board to do the funding, but as the funder, do we have any way, other than you guys looking at them, of, I guess, questioning their priorities in terms of where they are proposing their money goes to? And I've got a comment, I'll reserve my right to have a comment before the decision, but do we have any ability to do that?
I'll give you a two-part answer to that. In a formal legal sense, your opportunity is through providing what are known as funding principles for the funding board to consider when it's doing its assessment of the funding applications. And we've done that previously, paraphrasing slightly, that the funding board must consider council's proposed rates increase when thinking about their proposed levy, and also that they should look to fund activities that align with the Auckland plan, which is a pretty high level sort of indication. So that's your formal mechanism for doing that. Informally, there is the opportunity as staff or elected members to have discussions with the members of the funding board to just give them an idea of what our priorities are. That's not necessarily binding on them, but in many ways, like discussions with MOTAT and the museum, it's all through relationships and we can have those discussions. So if we're clear about what those priorities are, we can communicate them.
Just for everybody's knowledge, a RAFA board is another one of the items on the list of things that we're looking to have more say in. I mean, that's $17 million, of which really we have no say in at all, or not enough. And I don't know whether the people have got background on the right thing. For instance, who knows how much it costs to hire the Philharmonia Trust Orchestra for a night in the room? Anybody? A lot. No, it's not actually. It's way underneath. I do know that. We just did it. And they charge themselves out at a level which doesn't actually pay themselves enough to get the 4.5 million back. So just dumb. And we would have paid a lot more. And so clearly the people in charge, from the little bit I know about this, is we've got the wrong people in there. So I will welcome inputs from people who know something about this. I won't announce how much it is, but people can ask privately. No more questions? Councillor Fletcher.
Alistair, can you confirm that this is a delicate juggling act between legislative compliance and financial pragmatism, and whether we have any ability to influence in the way that the Mayor is requesting, other than the appointments for which we are responsible, that we are in the process of making for the ARAFA board at the moment?
I think the answer is yes. It is a delicate balancing act, and each year, as staff, we sort of walk a line between what we can legally do and how we can influence.
And I'm sure you can confirm that every year for a few years now, we have debated the merits of ARAFA, which seems to be an anomaly in the Auckland amalgamation legislation, and it is pleasing to see the Mayor bringing advocacy to this matter. But my question to you is, are we able to influence the cultural policy outcomes that we want with the tight restraint of this legislation?
No.
Good questions
I don't
and
think
good
we
answers.
can waste any more time on this, because I think everybody has done as best they can to get it to where it is, and the only advice I would give is those that are charged with the responsibility through the Performance and Appointments Committee of appointing new board members is that they be aware that they are coming into a board that will be coming to the end of its natural life at some point soon.
Hopefully, and this debate will too, following Councillor Turner's brilliant, witty little incision now.
Thank you. Just so I've got it right, the debate that was being had by ex-councillor Sandra Coney, now board member of Waitakere, about that 455, that is now put back a year, right? That's outside this, the explanation at the bottom, if I got that right?
Slightly complicated answer. What is included in here for Surf Life Saving allows them to fund their status quo activities for the coming summer. What we discussed yesterday is additional funding for the coming summer that you could have the option to provide through the annual plan to increase the level of service. So patrol beaches for longer and patrol some new beaches. And if we were supportive of that, then the Surf Life Saving would have the ability in future years to apply for funding for those additional services through the ARAFA regime.
It was the main crux of the whole thing was that they'd been left out of the initial consultation. There was a gap where only part of their request went forward. I'm just trying to get this right to report back.
So Surf Life Saving came to Auckland Council with its analysis or needs analysis of the beaches, which led to their recommendation around the extended hours and the additional services in August last year. Now, normally that would go to a committee for consideration to see whether we endorsed it. Due to the timing being immediately prior to the election, there was not time to get committee consideration of that prior to the election, which was also when Surf Lifesaving had to get their application into ARAFA for the funding. So it's just been a misalignment of time.
Okay, do we have a proposer and a seconder of this?
Yeah, we do.
Simpson Henderson?
Councillor Baker has got a comment.
Baker, were you commenting, Councillor Darby, or stretching? Oh, okay. Baker?
I'm commenting. So I guess for me this is, I'm troubled by this, and but I absolutely respect the work of the ARAFA board, and I hate annual grants. I much prefer to see it enter into 3-year funding agreements to give everybody greater certainty. However, what troubles me with this is we heard yesterday from Surf Lifesaving New Zealand, and I note the issues that they have now ongoing caused by the storm. So Bethel's Beach is gone. Karitahi Surf Lifesaving Club, one of our most dangerous beaches, and with a number of fatalities in the last couple of years. Their buildings falling down around them. They've got a project where they've fundraised $5 million. Council's been a great funder of that, but now the whole project is at risk because of cost escalations. They are now unable to do any part of that funding, and so the building's going to fall down in that beach. As I say, one of the most dangerous in Auckland is going to struggle to keep people there safely as surf lifesaving people. And so I note that $350,000 going to between the Philharmonia and the Theatre Club, and I've read and reread the reports of the ARAFA board talking about why they're doing that, and I struggle to understand generic answers, generic commentary about their what they're doing and why, and then the drowning's endemic in this country, in this city, and for the parts of Auckland that further from hospitals, the rescue helicopter saves more lives than anything else in the city, and yet all of the funding increase is going to the arts. And so just from, I guess, my history is I struggle to swallow that. I really do struggle with that, and hence my question as to how we can actually, I guess, question the decision making of those, because zero to the Rescue Helicopter Trust. They all talk about how the all of the so the theatre company and Philharmonia are going through restructures and looking at their organisations, and then they talk about the same with the Rescue Helicopter Trust, and they talk about the same with Surf Lifesaving. And so I just struggle with the consistency of it. I struggle that the things that save lives, volunteers put themselves in harm's way on a daily basis for the benefit of others, and we're not giving them appropriate funding. There is funding that should be coming from the government, absolutely hands down, but at the moment it's not. And I'm really uncomfortable with the split on this, but again, not our decision, and is the I get that. But that's something I think we need to work on, and I think we need to move away from these annual grants, which gives nobody any surety at all, and it's just a pain in the neck to have to deal with for everyone.
I think you got a fair bit of support in what you said there. I mean, we've had impassioned speeches about the Pacific at the museum, and I don't know anybody in South Auckland who goes to the opera, but there it is, the opera. And so it's a random selection. I think somewhere or other Rodney Hyde played darts some years ago with a list on the wall. It wasn't just a list on the wall. Yeah, well, that's possibly true. Councillor Henderson is going to throw some light on this.
No, look, I just wanted to back up Councillor Baker because I thought you've raised some really good points that I wanted to kind of touch on. A number of us, including yourself, Mayor, have asked to reform the ARAFA stuff, and I think that's really welcome. You know, as Councillor Baker said, this is not fit for purpose in 2023 in Auckland. But also another point that he raised that I thought was a very good one, we are losing too many people to our beaches. I mean, the death toll every single summer is completely unacceptable. We've been given a proposal that would go some way towards helping that situation, and I would like us to support it somehow, some way. And I think it just highlights how bad the Arafa stuff is when we, as a council, can't really easily do that, as Councillor Baker has said. Those were kind of my only points. I'm glad to support it otherwise. Thanks, Mayor.
Very good. I think it stands for a random arty-farty board, but I'm not sure. I could be wrong. It does have a mover and it does have a sector, and we've had some fascinating debate on this one. All those who wish to do this, please say aye.
Aye.
All those who want to murmur, murmur. Like it's carried, murmurs lost out. The third one now, MOTAT have achieved the quite amazing thing of actually asking for less. So I think Oliver Twist has proposed this one. Moved and seconded by random people. Councillor Fully and the Deputy Mayor. All those in favour, please say aye. Bingo. Now there's a bit of a future